Hello, everyone, and it's so nice to have you here at the Welcome to Music podcast for music, arts and classroom educators in early childhood and primary elementary schools, music therapists, studio music teachers, parents and anyone who uses music with kids to support their wellbeing and development from 0 to 12 years. My name is Susie Davies-Splitter and I've been teaching music to all ages in early childhood, schools and universities over many years. With my husband Phil, we run Welcome to Music, where we create music resources. We have a membership community and present training and programs for kids and educators. Our goal is to help build confidence and creativity and enrich lives through the joy of music. I hope that this podcast can support and inspire you and maybe even make your job a little easier through sharing tips, chats, lesson plans, interviews and great quality music resources to use with your children. I use an inclusive, multimodal, multisensory and Orff-based approach to help make the learning stick. Please enjoy the Welcome to Music podcast and find us at welcometomusic.net.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone.
Thanks for joining our Welcome to Music podcast, episode number 7, where I'll be chatting with Christoph Maubach, who is an internationally recognised music educator, Orff Schulwerk Practitioner and community singing leader. He divides his time as workshop facilitator and music and movement teacher between Germany and Australia. Christoph retired as a senior lecturer in music education from Waikato University, New Zealand, and before that was lecturer in music education at the Australian Catholic University in Melbourne. In Germany, he provides vocal workshops for a cappella groups and teaches music and dance at the Youth Music Organisation in Berlin. Christoph is also an active board member of the International Orff Schulwerk Forum Salzburg, the IOSFS. He also conducts workshops in Taiwan, Europe, Australia and New Zealand, where he leads the 2024 North Island Singing Tour. Listen to the podcast or read the transcription in the blog to find out more. You're going to love this episode. So it's lovely to see you, Christoph, and you're in Taipei.
Yes, thank you, Susie. Yes, it's lovely to see you too. I am in Taipei and it's quite nice. It's almost exactly halfway between Frankfurt and Melbourne. So, when I make that trip either way, either from Europe to Australia or from Australia to Europe, I usually stop here.
Very nice. Very, very nice. And you've just been in Germany for quite a while.
Yes, I spent time between about mid-April of this year and just very recently I arrived here in Taipei. So yeah, on a personal level, can I say my dream to spend always half a year in Europe and the other half in Australia and New Zealand. At the moment, that seems to be working. Let's see what happens in the future. But for the time being, I'm very happy looking forward personally to visiting my daughter in Melbourne, also visiting friends in Melbourne, visiting yourself and others, and being part of courses in New Zealand as well. That's quite wonderful. It's a lovely opportunity.
Well, Christoph, it's such a pleasure to be able to interview you because we've been friends for a long time.
Indeed.
I'm trying to think. 30 years comes to mind. I don't know, it's been a long time, hasn't it? And we met, of course, in Melbourne, but you've come from Germany. So let me start by asking you, just explain to everyone, how did you get involved in music when you were a kid? And I know there was some kind of family connection, but if you can explain it to me.
Look, thank you, Susie, for asking that. I won't spend too much time on that question, on the personal question, because I'm also keen to answer many of your other questions. But thank you for
I've got
that.
lots.
Thank you for that. Look, it's somewhere it's simple and it's probably replicated in many other families. I come from a somewhat large family with 5 children. Both my parents played music, although they had different professions. My father played the piano quite proficiently, and in a Catholic kind of context where I grew up, every Christmas time my father would play Christmas carols on the piano and we all sang. My mother sang a lot. She was also into theater and she played the recorder early on, and my parents also danced. So that's where the foundations, that's where the foundations were. And as I mentioned already, there was a religious context. I grew up in a Catholic family, and already as a 6-year-old, I was involved in a children's early childhood music group that sang twice a week at somebody's place. And often the focus was to learn Latin or other Christian songs that could be presented during a church service on a Sunday. So I found myself as a 6 and 7-year-old quite exposed in front of the altar of a Christian church, singing to the participants in the church, sometimes solo, sometimes together with others. I guess, very early on, I learned to express myself in such a way that other people could hear me.
Yes, and at a very young age too.
Yeah.
And just to have that family influence is just so vital and so important, which we can talk more about, of course.
Yes.
But wow, you had such a huge family influence with your mother, your father, and all those early childhood
Yeah.
activities that you were involved with.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was it that got you to a point where you became so passionate about music? I guess doing all of those things, yes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look,
Yeah.
early childhood, these are formative years for every person, for every child, for you, for our colleagues, for everybody, for me too. But then comes a period of thirst, if I can put it that way. Thirst in a way that a young teenager gets distracted in life by various other things. For a boy, it's also testosterone and other things that take you away from what your parents would like you to do. But I was very fortunate. I went to a high school as a young teenager where music was a large focus. I had already started piano as a 9-year-old, flute as an 11-year-old, and that continued during high school times. And very soon during high school, I learned about jazz. I learned about rock and roll. I mean, how can you not learn about rock and roll when you grow up with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles? We tried to replicate that as 14, 15, 16-year-olds in high school. And these were also formative events. We formed our own band. I was part of our own experimental rock band when I was 14, 15, and 16 years of age.
I had a very similar journey to you, very similar. So I didn't really have good models at school in terms of my teachers and in terms of teaching me music. There was very little. But I got involved with the kids in the neighborhood, and we had our garage band, and we used to rehearse also like you, all the rock music, because it was such good music, as you say, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and we had some really good Australian artists like John Farnham. I remember in 1969 listening to John Farnham on the radio and getting very excited when I was in grade 6. So that really makes a difference, doesn't it? Just being able to explore and experiment with music. Particularly in an improvisational kind of setting, it really makes a difference, doesn't it?
And yes, and may I say, there was also one other aspect. particularly useful in those days when it comes to the instrumentation and the equipment. In those days, the 60s, the equipment was accessible. I mean, we're talking about an electric guitar with 6 strings, a bass guitar, maybe a drum kit, or as it was originally, some kind of boxes that you found when you didn't have the money to buy a drum kit. But what I'm trying to say, the technology was achievable and accessible. Whereas nowadays, the technology requires a lot of learning. If you want to work these days as a DJ, for example, or with music in that realm, you need to learn, almost like a programmer, you need to learn digital equipment and things like that add wonderful things to the realm of pop and rock music and jazz. But in our days, it was a little bit simpler.
Yes, I haven't sort of thought of it like that. Although there are simple programs you can use, GarageBand and Audacity, and there are simple programs that you can use. Yeah. It's a totally different world now, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
But I do agree. We were just able to just pick up a guitar and play something easy, maybe just starting with 2 or 3 chords and just jamming on that, which was so much fun. It was so good. So we've had very similar journeys in that way.
That's nice to hear. Yes. It was shortly after high school in 1970 and 1971. My God, I'm showing my age as I talk about these years. But it was at that time that I was involved in a band. We cut our first long play record in Germany. This, for our region, it was quite successful, actually. So much so that in 2012, 40 years after the event, I got a phone call in New Zealand from somebody in Germany saying, would you mind if we re-edit your recording from 1971 and put it on a CD and also re-edit it as a long play record? And the members who had survived all agreed that we would do that. So, it was re-edited and republished in 2011.
Oh, how wonderful. See all these things I don't know about you, Christoph. Yes. It's so good.
Yes. It's true. We've all lived a long life. I have lived a particularly long life.
Absolutely. That's why I'm doing this podcast, you see.
Lovely. That's great.
I'm really excited about it. So, all right. So we've heard about your kind of childhood, going into high school, getting involved in bands. So then just explain how you got into music education, music and movement education as a professional music educator.
Thank you for that question too. So I was a conscientious objector in the south of Germany, not going to the army in the early 1970s. And I had to do what we would call civil service. And I worked as a nurse, actually, in an institution where there were disabled children. And my job was to work with them every day to help feed them and dress them and, the elemental things that people need to do. Yeah. And one day in this institution, I found a poster stuck to the wall where it said, "Music and Movement with the Disadvantaged and Disabled Child," a course by Professor Wilhelm Keller from the Orff Institute. And I thought, that sounds intriguing. I want to participate in that. So I did this weekend course, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday course that, in a way, we do these kind of courses these days still for people who are interested in that field. So I attended that course, and within hours, I was hooked on the idea that you could learn about rhythm, melody, and harmony by playfully working in a circle with body percussion, with singing, with patterns, with sticks, with balloons, and various other things. So within hours, I was hooked on that. So I went to that professor after the 2 days and said, "Where can I get more of this? Thank you." Yes. And he said, "Well, why don't you come to the open day at the Orff Institute in May," which I did. And the rest, I went on from there to actually do a course in the field of music and movement and improvisation because of my rock background, improvisation was always my thing. As a matter of fact, our rock band had a strong leaning towards jazz. And, I was playing the flute in a jazz style in that rock band, like Jazz Rotal in a way. That's how it started.
Okay, so basically your tertiary education was the Orff course.
Yes, I did
And
4 years. Yes,
Yeah, so that was 4 years.
yes,
And now, do they have that 4-year course now in German?
yes,
They do.
yes.
Because I know that they've got the 1-year English speaking, well, it's 9 months
Yeah.
English speaking
Yeah.
course. Okay.
Yes.
The Welcome to Music podcast is brought to you by the Welcome to Music membership, where for a small monthly or reduced yearly fee, you can download all of the notes, music notation, ukulele chord charts, and percussion arrangements for the podcasts, blogs, webinars, and Freebie Fridays. Have ongoing access to over 50 hours of music education and video recordings suitable for early childhood and the primary elementary school. Access over 50 hours of professional development certificates for courses, webinars and workshops. Access great discounts on events and products. And access hundreds of musical resources to use in your classrooms. Join us at welcome-to-music.membership-plan.
Yes, and what they call the A course or the bachelor course, the one that I did is now 5 years, not 4 years.
Really?
And there is, in the German language, there's also, if you like, a graduate diploma, a 2-year course. Then there's the English-speaking course that you described, and there are also various, what I would call, alongside professional learning. That is professional learning for teachers who stay in their job and, once every 6 weeks they meet somewhere for 2 days to study the Orff Schulwerk ideas, like that.
Okay. So, all right. So you did this 4-year course back in the 70s?
1970s, late 70s.
Back in the 70s. And anybody we would know who were your teachers? Tell us any
absolutely.
names? Yes.
Yeah. So look, this is a good question too. I'm very grateful. I mean, of course, Barbara Hasselbach, Hermann Regner, who published, who has passed away in 2008, but he published the American editions of Schulwerk Music for Children, Volume 1, 2, and 3. He was strongly involved in publishing that. He was one of my teachers. There was a teacher from America by the name of Yvonne Gillespie, who came from San Francisco, who was actually the teacher of Doug Goodkin later as well.
That's right, yes.
So there were very interesting staff at that time. But to make the link to Australia for me, in 1977 and 1978, I also attended summer courses at the Orff Institute, or may it be as an assistant, making tea and coffee for the teachers of the summer course. And there was a teacher from Australia coming to these summer courses by the name of Richard Gill.
Richard Gill.
And he taught in Salzburg at the summer courses, and I was allowed to visit his classes, to audit his classes, even though my job was to make him coffee. But I attended his sessions, and I was absolutely mesmerized by what he did, and I was engrossed with all his ideas and his skills and his pedagogical ideas as well. So, at the end of, in 1978, was it 1978? Round about that time, I asked him, if I ever would make it to Australia, could I visit you? And he said, if you come to Australia, I'll pick you up at the airport. Which in the end he did, because the story doesn't end there. It just briefly continues in that Dr. Regner, one of my teachers at the Orff Institute, did a teaching tour to Australia in 1978 for the German Cultural Center. He came back to the Orff Institute when I was working there as an assistant. He came into the room and he said, Christoph, you like traveling, don't you? I said, yes, I love traveling. Would you like to spend a year in Australia? And I said, yes, thank you very much. And that was it. Then I found at the end of 1979, I found myself in Sydney, and lo and behold, Richard Gill picked me up at the airport in Sydney and took me into his family for the first few weeks. Yeah.
How amazing.
Yes.
So amazing.
Yeah.
Goodness me.
I was quite lucky, I'd have to say, you know.
And obviously you already spoke English, because
I
that
spoke,
would have been a bit of a prerequisite.
yeah, I spoke some high school English. But thank you, Susie, for mentioning that very important point for a music pedagogue, for all of us. Language is obviously incredibly
Yes.
important. So after I had done a summer workshop in January up in Armadale in New South Wales in January 1980, I went back to my accommodation in Melbourne, and I realized if I'm to start here in February at a school and at university, as it was planned, I have to learn English language materials so that I can actually teach. So I spent every night and every afternoon listening to, in those days, audio tapes with materials from Richard Gill and others in the English language. And I learned these by heart. You know, I mean, sometimes I still remember these kind of rhymes, songs, riddles, and ideas. You know, that was my job. I had to learn these things. Luckily, I love listening to music still to this day. And I loved listening to these nursery rhymes and songs from various experts of Australia in those days. And it helped me when I started teaching there.
Yes, my goodness. And of course, you know, we know that you didn't just stay for a year.
Yes.
So what happened?
Look, thank you for asking that too, because there were some significant meetings. In the first 3 or 4 months, I realized that people in Australia are very curious and very hospitable. So, you know, I can tell you, I worked at Burwood, what was then called Burwood State College, Deakin University. And, you know, some of the students even, they were curious about me. They said, would you like to come and stay with us at our beach house this weekend? I said, yes. And somebody else would say, we've got some horses out there past the Dandenongs. Would you like to come along with us? I said, yes, for sure. I also, incidentally, in those days, through coincidence, also through students, made connections with, can I say, the Jewish community, the Israeli community in Caulfield, in, you know, if you like, your background, your region.
Yes.
Originally, I met people there, and they invited me into their life. Come and eat with us. Come and spend the Friday night with us during our celebrations. I was absolutely amazed with the kind of warmth and hospitality that was extended to me, especially by the Jewish community. In the context where I come from, and you know where my background was in Germany, you know, that was even more so remarkable. And it was later in the year 1980, after I had already decided if I ever get a chance to stay here, I will stay. It was there then that I met Audrey Klein, as she was called at that time, and Gary King.
She's now called Audrey Klein again.
Yeah. So I met Audrey and Gary. We actually shared a house later in 1981 and 1982, and we formed a band, Shenanigans. And again, I was invited into the community and the music of Shenanigans and what we created together. That really did it for me. You know, I will never go away here. I mean, we hit it off very well with each other in terms of our ideas. You know, like every team of people, there are, you know, creative frictions at times as well. But, you know, it was really fantastic what we were able to create with each other. I mean, in terms of our own enjoyment. I mean, I can't even talk about what happened then later on in terms of how that band became famous, but simply sitting in our lounge room every day after classes and playing music together with mandolin and guitar and flute and singing and all of that. And at some point in 1983, I had a hurdy-gurdy and all of that. I mean, the enjoyment that we created for each other was sublime.
Oh, and I just remember, because I started getting involved with the Orff movement shall we say,
Yes.
early 80s.
Yeah.
And I remember going to workshops and camps, and there were all sorts of
Yes.
things where, we'd just all get together and jam, and particularly you and Gary and
Mm.
Audrey would so often play at our conferences,
Yeah.
and you were such an inspiration, really, to so many of us.
Yeah.
And as you say, it wasn't long after that Shenanigans became very well known all around the world. I know you went overseas.
Yeah.
You went and performed and facilitated workshops over at the American Orff conventions.
Yeah.
And people still today are using all the wonderful recordings, all that beautiful folk music. So, for any listeners that don't know about Shenanigans, it's just a wonderful range of folk music, folk dance music from all around the world, beautifully recorded,
Mm.
beautiful vocals. That is still used all these years later.
Indeed. So personal circumstances made it in 1986 when my daughter Emilia was born in April 1986. I decided to withdraw from the band. I felt I need a situation where I can securely look after my family. 1986, Emilia was born. 1989, my son Anthony was born. And I made that decision, however difficult it was. But a lot of musicians make that decision
Oh, of
at some point
course.
in their life.
That's right.
And my involvement with the Orff Schulwerk Association in Victoria and then other Orff associations became stronger.
Yes. And would I be right in that at that time you then started teaching? You took up school
Yeah.
positions, music positions at schools.
Yes. So I had already always taught part-time somewhere. I'd also taught part-time at Melbourne University in the Faculty of Music with Orff classes. And then in about 1988 or 1989, I was asked by what was then called the Mercy College in Ascot
Oh, yeah.
Vale. I
Yes.
was asked, would you come and teach 3 days for us, for our students in this teaching program, which I then took on. That seemed like a secure thing to do. And from then on, it went further and further. And I found myself from then on basically in tertiary education.
Yes. And of course, Mercy College became the Australian Catholic University.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember going to workshops with you, Christoph.
Yeah.
Pascoe Vale or Ascot Vale, it could have been. Ascot Vale.
Yes.
And then, of course, the university moved to East Melbourne.
East Melbourne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And yes, so you were involved in ACU for many, many years, weren't you?
21 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Until 2008. And it was interesting, when we talk about the kind of courses that teachers can take in order to further themselves in music and movement education a la Orff. At ACU in the mid-1990s, we developed a graduate certificate course in Orff music education. Later, it became a graduate diploma. And for some of the years that we developed it there, it was really a very successful course with a lot of participants. We were able also in some form or shape to work together with the Victorian Orff Schulwerk Association to make that work. There was a desire by many teachers to be active as teachers in music education, to involve movement, to be creative, to allow children to be expressive. And many of these things we were able to offer in those graduate certificate courses.
I know. It was so wonderful. And my understanding, Christoph, is that there is nothing like it now anywhere in Australia. We need something like that, don't we?
Yes. Look, can I say now, having this unique opportunity to travel between the Southern Hemisphere and Europe and learning about what happens in Europe, and we could put a footnote here later on because it's quite a challenge for me at my age to learn things in Germany where I have really never been as a teacher. But let me come back to what I'm trying to say about the differences. For example, the Orff Institute, is being held up as, if you like, a limelight for music and movement education. But it has to be said, in places like Munich, Berlin, Hanover, Prague, other cities in Europe, these kind of courses now exist as well. So the Orff Institute is not the only place where you can study music and movement in depth. You can go to other cities as well. So
Yes.
I agree with you, Susie. There would be ample reason to have graduate diploma or graduate certificate courses in Orff Music and Movement in Melbourne, in Sydney, if they aren't there already. I know for a fact that Auckland in New Zealand has something like that with Millie Locke. And there are probably others developing. But I do agree with you. A kind of cooperation between Victoria and Orff Schulwerk Association and a tertiary institution should be on the menu. Can I put it that way?
Absolutely. Can you tell us what is Orff Schulwerk
Yeah.
and how did you get involved?
Thank you again, Susie, because you're allowing us both now to go into a bit more depth about this, also this peculiar term, Orff Schulwerk, or, as some people might translate it, Orff's schoolwork. Yes. So the German composer Karl Orff, together with his colleagues, developed this idea of an integrated form of learning about music already in the 1920s, like 100 years ago. And then later on, after the Second World War, it was reconceived by Gunhild Ketmann, a co-worker of Karl Orff's, as a music and movement approach for children in schools. And that's where the word Orff Schulwerk also comes from. In that, music was published under the title Orff's Schoolwork or Orff Schulwerk in 5 different volumes. And from there, a pedagogical journey began. So basically what it is for teachers is combining music and movement and spoken word or speech as an integrated approach that would allow children to learn about the elements of music in a creative, playful, and active way. So the difference to any traditional, formally existing music approach would be you actually get involved hands-on. Whereas maybe in the olden days, let's say 120 years ago, children would sit in a room, a teacher would play the piano and they would sing hymns. And that was their musical education. Suddenly, the premise is you get involved, you play with instruments like xylophones or hand drums, and as you play, you find out how music is constructed. How did they make this? How come I feel this way? Joyful, for example, if it's a joyful kind of pattern that I'm playing, how come I feel this way? So this approach quickly became popular because teachers realized children can get ownership. They own the music that they make. What can be more motivational
and
than
that makes such a difference.
Yeah.
When people or children own the music.
Yeah.
They're so much more engaged. They're so much more motivated, aren't they?
Yes.
To be part of that experience. This podcast has been brought to you by Welcome to Music, building confidence, creativity and enriching lives through the joy of music. In the show notes, you'll find links to a summary of this episode and our social media platforms. And in the blog, you will find all the notes and the links to this episode. Our goal is to help make teaching and learning music easy and fun for all by using an inclusive, multimodal, multisensory and Orff-based approach to help make the learning stick. Find us at www.welcometomusic.net. Find hundreds of our songs on the streaming platforms such as Spotify and Apple Music. And again, search for our names, Susie Davies-Splitter and Phil Splitter, or the song title. And lastly, please join us in the socials on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find us if you put in Welcome to Music. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please share it with others and leave us a review. We would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope you have a fabulous rest of the week and weekend and enjoy Welcome to Music.
Welcome to music, we're gonna have some fun. Welcome to music, welcome everyone.